Leading Britain's conversation with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Call and WhatsApp message now 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
Good morning to you all. 3 minutes after 9 on Tuesday, June the 25th, and the big set-piece immigration debate now between James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, and Yvette Cooper, who, if I said right earlier, if the polls are right, if the betting is right, could well be taking his job in just a few short days' time. Now, in virtually every survey there's been, immigration is always in the top 3 factors that could determine how you vote, along with the economy and, of course, the NHS. And with figures showing as many as 4 million people have come here legally since 2019, which is roughly half the size of London, it's easy to see why. So let's open the questions straight away, one from me and then to the callers, going alphabetically, which seems the fairest way. So James Cleverly, coming your way, why should my listeners trust you now to run the Home Office? Morning, Mr Cleverly.
Nick, good morning. Well, under the Conservatives, we've not only recruited 20,000 new police officers, we're committed to recruiting an additional 8,000 full-time, fully warranted police officers embedded in communities around the country. That's the equivalent of about one per ward in England and Wales. But more than that, at this election, it's a choice. Elections are about choices. And the choice people will have in front of them is a Conservative Party which is committed to bringing down levels of immigration, which have been too high, and probably through conversations we can discuss part of the reason for that. But immigration is too high. We're committed to bringing it down. As Home Secretary, I've already started to do that. I've taken action, which was opposed by the Labour Party at the time. We are committed to stopping the boats, and we are committed to making sure that legal migration and illegal migration are reduced. And that's in stark contrast to the Labour Party, who, as I said, is voted against these measures time and time again, and led by someone who said that all immigration law is racist. So that's the choice at the election.
Okay.
And I'm determined to bring these figures down.
Mr Cleverly, thank you. I might challenge you with some of the numbers you've just said, but let's come first to Yvette Cooper, of course, Shadow Home Secretary, Labour's Home Secretary. Why should people trust you to run the Home Office? Yvette Cooper, morning to you.
Morning, Nick. So after 14 years of Conservative government, it really feels like everything is broken. We have had net migration has trebled in the last few years with nothing being done about skills shortages. 50,000 people arrived on these dangerous small boats undermining our border security since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. And then we've also seen that 90% of crimes are going unsolved, and there are 10,000 fewer neighbourhood police on the beat in our communities. People just don't see them. And that's why Labour has a plan to boost our border security, a new border security command with counter-terror powers to smash the criminal gangs, and to get neighbourhood police back on the beat in our communities, crack down on antisocial behaviour, and a mission to halve knife crime and to halve violence against women and girls, working across communities. They have had 8 Home Secretaries, 11 immigration ministers, 9 policing ministers, all from the Conservatives, all in the last 8 years, and the chaos has just got worse and worse and worse. Right. It is time for change.
Bring the callers in a moment. Do feel free to challenge each other. I mean, Mr Cleverly, can I put you, that is fair. We've now seen 50,000 arrivals under a Prime Minister who last January pledged he would stop the boats. That is one of those classic cases of failure you can imagine, isn't it?
Well, the small
what
boats,
else could you characterise it as?
So the small boats phenomenon is an international challenge. When I speak to the interior ministers across Europe, this is something that we're all facing. And indeed, in terms of let's look at the broader situation. In terms of asylum applications per capita, the UK is, I think, about 20th in Europe.
Okay.
But so this
Mr.
is the point.
Sunak's
So it is
Cleverly.
Yes, and we are committed to doing so.
Well,
and Labour, now that there's an election on, are talking tough on immigration, but their actions speak louder than words. They've voted against border control measures over 130 times. As I said, they're led by a person who said all immigration legislation is racist and who campaigned to prevent foreign criminals being deported. Their track record on this is appalling. They're talking tough now, but their actions are in contradiction.
Is this true?
To the language.
Cooper, your party has voted to block legislation, the Conservatives, and you're led by someone who has the beliefs James Cleverly has just said?
No, we support proper restrictions on visas. The immigration system has to be properly controlled and managed, and we also will introduce a new border security command to go after the criminal gangs, because they are wreaking havoc along our borders, and they've been allowed to do so. But James has brought in, this party has brought in 3 new laws that were all of them supposedly going to stop boat crossings, and in fact they've all just made the chaos worse.
All right, before we go to the caller, you did want to register a challenge. James Cleverly.
Yeah, so this new border command, what will be the relationship between that supposedly new border command and SBOC?
It needs to be part of it, but it's only one small part of it. I've been to the...
Just explain to listeners, SBOC,
I'm sorry. The small boats, there is a small boats operational command.
Thank you. So, Mr. Cleverly, how is it different?
It does do good work,
so
and I've been to see its control centre. But all it does is it looks at the operations in the channel itself. What it doesn't do is have proper networks right across Europe. It doesn't have the work to go after the criminal gangs. So it is additional. So ours is a proper overarching border security strategy and command, because we know from a whole series of independent reports that border security is too fragmented and too broken.
So it's just another squad, then?
No, all they've got is a small, limited programme around the operations in the channel. It's good, it's important, but it's not enough. You've got to go after the gangs before they get to the channel. You've got to stop the boats before they reach the French coast in the first place. You've got to go after supply chains, and we would have up to 1,000 additional cross-border police, intelligence and security officers and investigators, and new counter-terror powers, all of which they are not doing.
Yvette Cooper's given you a frank answer to your question.
I don't believe her. And the reason is because this is the first time I've asked this question for weeks and weeks and weeks about whether the Small Boats Operation Command, commanded by a British Army General, with contacts and an operational capability in the UK, in the Channel and in France, closely integrated with French law enforcement and border facilities.
Only along the Channel.
It is. This is literally the first time that we've had any kind of clarity. And when I've asked before whether the Small Boats Operation Command
and the grounds for which you don't believe her briefly are
because what she says now, what the Labour Party says now, is in complete contradiction to what they've done.
Is that true?
Time
That's
and time
simply
and
not
time
true. I mean,
again.
clearly we're not in power at the moment, so we're having to cope with the Conservatives' chaos and mess. But this is how we set this out last year, and it's what we've continued being arguing for. What James is doing is simply not enough. It is not working, and we can see it's not working.
I hear you. Let's get the first caller in. It's Josie from Leicester. Josie, your question. Go ahead. Good morning.
Hi.
Hello.
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning. I would like to ask you, what would you do to bring down the mass net migration in this country now?
OK, so thanks very much, Josie. That broadens it out, because we mustn't just... I'm going to start with you, Yvette Cooper. We mustn't just focus on boat crossings as well. There are levers a government could pull. How would Labour pull the levers?
So net migration has trebled since the last election. The Conservatives promised to bring it down at the last election. It has trebled since then. And the big driver behind it has been a big increase in overseas recruitment. So work visas more than doubled. And that's largely because the Conservatives failed to tackle the skills shortages that we're facing. They've also really run quite a kind of free market, laissez-faire approach to immigration. So it's been a failure, I think, on both the economy and migration. People have always come to this country to work in our public services, build our businesses, but the system has to be controlled and managed. That's why Labour will reduce net migration. We will continue with restrictions on visas and controls, and we will also have new requirements for skills shortages. And I will come to your point, Nick, but just to give one thing which really exemplifies the failure here. Engineering visas have doubled in the last few years. Engineering apprenticeships have near halved. That is a system that's broken. So we will have new requirements that link visa controls with training and workforce plans in the key shortage areas. We won't set a target.
Why?
Because we think that every time the Conservatives have done that, they've failed, and they're not even doing so now.
But I'm asking the Labour Party to set a target.
They've discredited it. And if you look at it from one year to another, it is obviously, it will be affected by things like the Homes for Ukraine visa that did obviously increase numbers.
I think we can put an asterisk by that.
And
so
the
I think
pandemic,
Afghanistan or whatever,
exactly.
We understand that.
And the pandemic also reduced numbers in that year. So we don't think it's right to have a particular
you
number target.
Conservatives
We do think it's right to have a significant reduction.
But what's significant?
And we do think that net migration needs to come down, and we've set out a plan to reduce it.
So, Yvette Cooper, what does significant mean? Understandably, you attack the Conservatives because they're the party that have been in power, and you can hit them with all the numbers, and you are right so to do, then when asked for your own number, you won't even
Sure.
say what significant is.
And I understand the question, but we've seen repeated Conservative governments set these targets that then end up being discredited. And we think it's important to build confidence in the system and to be serious.
You have targets regarding knife crime. We hear today Sakir is determined to halve knife crime within 5 years. We know targets elsewhere. Why is there this total silence for targets in this field? Lastly, Yvette Cooper, why? How do you justify
We're making a
it?
commitment to reduce net migration. We've said that needs to be significant, and we need visa controls that are being introduced, and we support those,
But I'm not gonna
and
get a
also
number
to
from
go
you, am I?
further on shortages. But I'm not going to set a number because I know it does vary from one year
Well,
to
you know you might
another
get it wrong.
on things like
You know
homes
you
for
might get it
Ukraine
wrong.
or other factors as well.
All right. James Cleverly.
Look,
Net
this-
migration, so not just the boats, Mr. Cleverly.
Yeah, and this is another example of what Labour are saying now in complete contradiction to what Labour were doing only very recently. So when I became Home Secretary, I introduced a series of visa restrictions because legal migration was too high. I introduced a minimum salary threshold.
Yep.
I restricted foreign students bringing family members when they come to the UK, and every single one of those measures was criticised and opposed at the time
That's not
by
true.
the Labour Party.
That's not true. You just made that up, James.
So they talk about wanting to bring this down, but this is a road to Damascus style conversion now that there's an election.
Well, unless
on.
you're citing false figures, which is what Yvette Cooper's saying.
And the measures that I have already taken are assessed to will reduce by about 300,000. So 300,000 fewer people will be eligible to come under the arrangement that I have put in place compared with previously. And this was opposed by Labour over and over.
Let's clarify the idea of this salary cap. Vivek, away you said
I think
he's
it's not true. And James keeps saying this, but I mean, it's simply made up. I mean, it's simply made up what he said. Some of the measures that...
So you didn't criticise the measures that I brought in?
Some of the measures you brought in are the ones we called for. So we called for the ending to the 20% discount, wage discount, unfair wage discount on overseas recruitment. It was introduced by the Conservatives after 2019. We called for its abolition, and eventually, after 4 years, the Conservatives finally agreed to abolish it. We called for the salary threshold for work visas to go up because it hadn't been updated for very many years. Eventually, the Conservatives did do so. We have supported measures, some of the measures, and we have said we will continue them.
So you're genuinely saying Labour did not... Because this can be very...
We said that we should increase the salary threshold.
But are you saying Labour did not criticise when I increased the salary threshold?
Well, we've supported it. Have we had any votes in Parliament on it, James?
So are you saying that Labour did not criticise the measures I took about the threshold for spouse visas?
You've changed those, haven't you? You had to change. Yes, you did.
I have changed those.
Yeah, but you had to also reverse your plans.
No, I haven't.
Because yes, you did.
No, I didn't.
You reversed it because you were originally supposed to do something else and you reversed it.
No, I didn't.
So look, there is James is just making things up and. Actually, what we've said is we will continue with the visa controls because we do need to have proper visa controls in place. But none of this addresses. None of this addresses the real issues. If you don't tackle the skills shortages,
before we move on,
immigration is important, but it needs to be properly controlled and managed. And they're not tackling it on health, on social care, on IT, on engineering.
Cooper, briefly, James Cleverly.
So for the first time in the history of the NHS, we have a long-term workforce plan to make sure that we train the medical professionals that we need. Well, it never happened at all under Labour. We're also making sure that we increase by 100,000 the number of apprenticeships, something again which the Labour Party will
after 14
undo.
Years.
All right. Okay. Can I just check with you, Yvette Cooper? Would you reverse the restrictions on spousal visas?
So we have continued with the ones that have been brought in already. We think that any further changes need to be reviewed by the Migration Advisory Committee. We have supported the increase.
Those.
That needs to be reviewed by the Migration Advisory Committee.
We all know what a review means.
Rigby said that. So we all know a review means yes, probably, doesn't it?
I think, look, the spousal visa, this is a small area around families.
But it's something the Conservatives have brought in,
but whether
you agree with it or not. And I'm simply asking,
And
and you say it's up for review.
We're continuing the changes that have been brought in, which includes the increase
which
particularly
opposed at the time,
around,
which he
particularly
criticised.
around
Students'
the
families?
skills visa. Students' families, we have supported those
They
changes.
would stay.
Yes,
Spousal visas,
that's
we're not
right.
so sure.
And
All right.
we
I
have
think
also
that's a fair
supported the
characterisation.
continuation on the skill visa.
Okay, let's move on to another caller. Thank you very much. Chris is in Croydon. Chris, your question. Good morning.
Yes, good morning, Yvette, and good morning, James.
Good morning,
yes,
Chris.
My question is, what will your parties do with all the people who've arrived here illegally, especially as they've chucked away all their passports and papers and so on?
Okay, I'm going to come to James Cleverly first on this one. Are the people who do actually get here, what are your plans in the future? How many people are currently on the Bibi Stockholm, Home Secretary?
I don't have the precise.
Do you have an idea?
Figures for today. I don't want to guess, but I don't have the updated figures.
Is it working, the Bibi Stockholm?
Well, it is reducing. It is part of the plan that has allowed us to close asylum hotels, and we've reduced the number that we're using by well over 100, return them back to commercial use. Ultimately, what we want to do is we want to see the requirement for these all types of asylum accommodation reduced by controlling our borders. That's why it's so important that we have the Rwanda scheme, something that the Labour Party said it was scrapped, and as I'm seeing in the Telegraph today, a number of illegal migrants in France are waiting for that to be scrapped before they come over.
We'll come to that in a moment, absolutely.
And so ultimately we want the requirement for this accommodation to come down. Look, we have made it clear that we will return people to their country of origin if safe to do so, and for those for whom it is not safe to do so, that is why we have Rwanda, which is a safe third country. If Labour is going to take Rwanda off the table, which they've committed to do, they're going to have to explain where they are going to return people to if those people come from countries like Iran or Syria or Afghanistan, because you're not going to do a return agreement with the Taliban, and you're not going to do a return agreement with the mullahs in Tehran.
Okay, let's bring Labour in. Would you use Bibi Stockholm and other such vessels?
Well, we want to get the Conservatives' backlog right down so that we don't need to use any of their
But would everybody
barges. The
disembark
barges are
on day
incredibly
one?
expensive. No, you obviously can't do
Right.
that on day one. But you have to
How
use
long
the
before-
barges.
do you know how many people are on the Bibi Stockholm?
I don't have the figures. I wish James had updated us. I think we need to end these extortionate barges, bases, and
When would they
also
end?
hotels. We want to do that as fast as possible. But look, what you've got to do, first of all, the system is broken. So we need to prevent boats arriving in the first place, and that means smashing the criminal gangs with a new border security,
with
a new border security command to go after the gangs, to work with Europol, to work with other police forces across Europe in order to do that.
Which is what the
And
National
we
Crime
also
Agency
have
is
to-
already doing.
Only on too small a scale. It's much too small a scale, James. I mean, having talked to people in the National Crime Agency and in Europol, we're talking about an additional 1,000 cross-border police and investigators. We have to get serious going after the criminal gangs. Keir Starmer will talk about
Nick, can I put
the
this
action
into
he's taken
perspective?
on terror threats and on terrorist criminal
Yvette-
gangs as well.
Just briefly then, and let's get Yvette Cooper and James Cleverly.
Yvette is talking about an extra 1,000 Home Office officials. The Home Office already has over 40,000 officials. The idea that an extra 1,000 will miraculously smash the gangs when they are taking Rwanda off the table, when they are saying they are going to do less.
I mean, before,
somehow.
if we've got so many, why are they so lamentably slow in dealing with claims? Before I put that back to Yvette.
But the idea,
why are we so
but
slow
the idea
compared to
that an
other
extra
countries?
1,000 people will suddenly miraculously make this go away when you've taken away
I hear
the big
you.
deterrent. And the National
But why
Crime,
are we so slow compared
the
to,
National
say,
Crime
Italy?
Agency, the National Crime Agency, which
Mr. Cleverly.
Yvette has spoken about, have also said that as part of their response, they do need a credible deterrent, which Labour are about to take off the table.
Mr. Cleverly, why are we so much slower than our European friends in dealing with these claims?
I don't believe we are. It's
15 months, plays 8
is-
months
it
regarding
is-
the United Kingdom and France.
It is it's a mixed picture across Europe, and as I say, in terms of the scale of this challenge, it is very significant across the whole of Europe. This is something that we do have to do together. and the National Crime Agency works with international partners. I signed an agreement with the European Union's Frontex in terms of cooperation on that. The Small Boats Operation Command works with French law enforcement and beach officials.
Let's pick up on your point. How would 1,000 extra, I think you call them investigators, the point Mr. Cleveland, how is that suddenly going to resolve the situation, Yvette Cooper?
It's a cross-border police and intelligence and security investigators on a much bigger scale.
1,000
is not much bigger.
That's on top of existing. That's on top of. Hang on a second, James.
Let's listen to Yvette Cooper. She allowed you to speak, if I can, Mr. Cleverly. Thank you, Yvette Cooper.
It's on a much bigger scale than these current operations to go after the criminal gangs. As part of a proper strategy, we need the new security agreement and information sharing with European counterparts that unfortunately the Conservatives have abandoned. And we also need new counter-terror powers so that they can do much faster search and seizure as well, to be able to use those powers to go after organised immigration crime. And we need this as part of an overarching strategy that takes those gang networks seriously. So far, I mean, seriously, a BBC journalist did better at tracking down one of the gang leaders than the current operations that James is boasting about. So we have to do it better. And when you listen to Keir Starmer, will talk about the work he was part of to go after terrorist gang networks. We can take that action, and we have to do that again around these criminal smuggler and trafficking gangs.
Noting that Labour is opposed to the Rwanda scheme, as it's known, would you ever look at the use of another third country?
Well, let's look at what's gone wrong with this Rwanda scheme. And I'll come back to that, because it is important. And James keeps boasting about this Rwanda scheme. They've been running this scheme for 2.5 years, and so far they've sent, two volunteers? Perhaps James can clarify. Is it 2 volunteers? And they've sent £300 million to Rwanda. So we should be working with other countries. So we should be working in partnership, and we'll always look at anything that works. But what we won't do is send £300 million for 2 volunteers and 3 Home Secretaries, which is about all that the Conservatives have actually sent.
Is that Sir Keir said you could look at using a third country, usually en route to their country of destination. So let's, for the purpose of debate, saying we're sending some people back to Syria. What's the third country we're going to use there then?
Well, there are different arrangements that you can look at.
You don't know, do you, respectfully?
Well, that's why we're not setting out a mad plan.
Nick,
we're not setting out a mad plan like the Conservatives
done.
I'm not asking for a mad
plan of it.
Well, I know, but that's what we've got. That is what we have got. We have got gimmicks at the moment, and they're failing. £300 million to send 2 people to Rwanda.
You've not got a clue what those countries might be.
We used to have the Dublin Agreement, which did have some returns to Europe,
and we were a net
did
recipient.
Also mean that we would give
Yvette,
for young people.
We were a net recipient because the challenge in Europe, as I've said, is more stark than the challenge in the UK. It's difficult for all of us, but in continental Europe they have a larger problem. So the arrangement that you're talking about will inevitably mean the UK becomes a net recipient of illegal migrants. We estimate about 100,000 additional.
No, this is just invented. This is just fantasy. This is just total garbage. No, I mean seriously.
Hang on.
No, he shouldn't be allowed to just, basically make stuff up or tell lies. I mean, that is just not on.
What is he making up, just to clarify?
He's got. Where's this 100,000? What is this? This is just garbage.
Well,
it's invented, isn't it, James?
The simple fact of the matter is the numbers in Europe are significantly higher than in the UK per capita.
Right.
And therefore, if we do some kind of sharing arrangement like the Dublin Agreement, we will inevitably be a net recipient. And when Yvette says, are we going to do greater cooperation, she needs to explain why would countries that have a larger challenge than us be willing to receive people from us.
Let's ask Yvette Cooper directly.
So we've said very clearly we won't join the EU member states quota scheme. That wouldn't be right for the UK. What we should be doing, however, is sharing intelligence on things like who has already claimed asylum and been turned down in other countries. At the moment, we don't know that, so we can't even then swiftly return them. What we should also be doing is having a new returns and enforcement unit. That's what Labour would set up in the UK as well, to increase returns, because those have dropped by about 40% under the Conservatives, and get into this mad system that they've got at the moment where people arrive and then they can just stay indefinitely
what happens with them? Because
under
my understanding is since 2022 we're talking around 50,000 people, I believe, broadly speaking. under the Labour Party, I can challenge Mr Cleverly about how long it takes, and that's fair, but under the Labour Party, there are suggestions they will get an amnesty. Is that correct?
They will.
Quite the opposite. It's quite the opposite. Actually, we don't believe in amnesties. We think the rules should be properly enforced.
So what will happen to those 50,000?
So at the moment, actually, James is giving them an amnesty
Let's
at the moment.
Let's hear from Yvette Cooper, James. I register that. I will come to you. Let's hear from Yvette Cooper. Those 50,000 will get an amnesty? No.
No,
what will happen to them?
Absolutely not. That would be wrong. We're at the moment...
So what will happen to them?
Start with the position at the moment that this is, if Labour was elected, this is what we would inherit. For all of those 50,000, and it may be as many as 80,000 at the moment.
You won't get an answer, Nick, by the way.
As many as 80,000 at the moment. All of those people are currently in the asylum system.
Yes.
They're in asylum accommodation, and they're effectively being told they can stay forever because no decisions are being made.
I
know, but I've got to finish the point first, Nick. I will finish the point, and then I'll come to what we would do about it.
You won't get an answer, Nick.
Wait,
James,
Mr Cleverly, if you would.
They're staying, effectively being told they're staying forever because less than 1% of them, even if they got the Rwanda scheme going, would be sent to Rwanda. 99% of them stay forever. We think that's wrong. So we think those asylum claims have to be processed. We think decisions need to be made. And then that means you also need a proper returns unit to return people who have no right to be here. And at the moment, everybody, even if they have come from safe countries, is able to stay forever in the asylum system.
50,000, and these are all human souls we're talking about. How long would it take for those 50,000 people to be processed, Yvette Cooper?
So we don't know the full timetable because we don't know exactly what we would inherit. When we had looked at this previously, we had done some assessments which suggested it might take around a year to clear the backlog. But I have to be honest, I don't know what a Labour government would inherit in terms of the state of the Home Office and the state of the backlog, because they're not being honest with us about how many people are in these hotels. And bear in mind, they enter hotels, but then they never leave under their system. They're not taking decisions. It's like Hotel California.
And thank you for staying silent. I do appreciate it. Miss Cleverly, I know you wanted to intervene a moment or two ago.
Well, your listeners will notice that, just as I predicted, you did not get an answer into what Labour would do with these people, because, and also something... Again,
well, they would seek to get more caseworkers, but go back to your point. That's
actions speak louder to words. So Yvette has just said that the Labour Party does not believe in an amnesty. That is not true, because the Labour government has previously put an amnesty for illegal migrants. They've already done it. They're the only government ever to have done it in the UK. The Labour Party have done it. So that is...
Many years ago, I think I need to say, in fairness to the Labour
point is,
side here.
They have done it. So the idea they don't believe in it is just untrue, because they have done it. The other fact is that, again, Labour are claiming they will create something that's already there. Immigration enforcement...
But it's not working.
No, it is.
Cleverly,
immigration enforcement.
But we wouldn't have 50,000 people.
Immigration enforcement
kicking their heels if it was working.
Deports people all the time. There are flights going multiple times a week, deporting people back to countries that have no right to be here. And the fact is,
the very existence of these 50,000 speaks to this, doesn't it?
But Nick, without a safe third country to which people can be removed, there are people who are currently in our immigration system that will inevitably have to have an amnesty under Labour, because there is nowhere they can be returned to. Right. Where are they going to return people to if they've come from Afghanistan or Syria?
We've looked at that. Okay.
Or Iraq. Labour will inevitably have to let them out on the streets with an amnesty.
One more very
then
brief
I'll
point
if you could keep
on
it
this.
Moderately quick, Yvette, because we need to get a news break.
James Cleverly is conning people. He's not sending 50,000 people to Rwanda. So far, he has managed to send 2 volunteers to Rwanda in 2.5 years. At that rate, frankly, it would be centuries before they had even managed to make any inroads into the backlog. It is a con. That's the backdrop.
But if you have no safe third country at all, you are inevitably going to have to give an
amnesty. It's a con, James, and everybody knows it.
You are going to have to give an amnesty.
If you thought it was going to work, you'd have called the election by now. You wouldn't be calling the election now.
I'm going to press pause now, if I may. We come back, of course, to James Cleverly, Yvette Cooper, perhaps touching on just a couple of other matters. Just before we come to the next caller, Jay, it will be you. Yvette Cooper, I'm coming to you. A claim I think that was referenced by Mr Cleverly earlier. A report in the Daily Telegraph today says that migrants in northern France report they're waiting for a Labour government before crossing the Channel after Sir Keir Starmer's pledge to scrap the Rwanda scheme. If it is to be believed, they're waiting to cross. How do you respond to that as potential Home Secretary?
I think look at the facts. People aren't waiting, they're arriving, because the small boat gangs, the criminal gangs, are organising boats. We've had record crossings, 12,000 in the course of this year. That is a record spring crossings. The Rwanda scheme's been running for 2.5 years, and all they've sent is two
but
volunteers
what if there might
and
be
3
more
home
amassing,
secretaries.
even as we
It is not
speak?
working.
Okay, but there might be more arriving, as reports
I think people are going to be disappointed if they think that, because Labour is going to introduce a new border security command that will smash criminal gang networks that are currently organising these dangerous boat crossings that are undermining our border security and putting lives at risk.
Okay, just those figures again. Up until last week, it was 12,313 who'd crossed the channel this year. The same period last year, 10,472. The same period the year before, 11,659. Coming to you, James Cleverly. Are you voters really meant to believe that people living in camps and on sand dunes are looking at the polling of the next general election in the United Kingdom? Really?
They absolutely do. The people smugglers...
Those people are doing that, Mr. Cleverly.
Well, unless you're going to accuse the journalist that went over there and spoke to them of lying, which I think would be a bold call. We know that this is a digitally enabled criminal enterprise. The people smugglers and the people that seek to be smuggled pay very, very close attention to a whole range of things. And it is clear from these quotes that there's a cohort of people currently in France who are waiting for Rwanda to be taken off the table before coming over here. And these quotes in the Telegraph make it really clear. I will not go until the day they make the right decision to destroy Rwanda. I am looking forward to a new government. If things change, I will go. That is a direct quote.
Even though, as Yvette Cooper writes in the Daily Telegraph today, even if Rwanda worked, it would only cover around 1% of asylum seekers, even if it was working.
That's
James Cleverly.
No, because... It is about creating a deterrent, and we've seen from these quotes it's already starting to have a deterrent, and it's not fully operational yet. And I just want to pull up, and this is, I think, a really, really important issue about Labour, I think, trying to con the British people. When Labour talk about this new border command, they did not say that we are going to strengthen the Small Boats Operation Command or extend its remit or give it more budget. They tried to pretend that the function didn't exist. When they talk about using counter-terrorism powers for people smugglers, again, it's about sounding tough because they don't have a plan. Because actually, if they're talking about counter-terrorism work should be be at terrorism. These are criminals, and they're very violent, serious criminals, but counter-terrorism is one thing, and smuggling is something else.
Yvette, in a sentence, if you would, or two, Yvette Cooper.
I think James Cleverly is clutching at vox pop straws when he should be taking responsibility for the facts, which is that the boat crossings have reached a record high this spring, and since Rishi Sunak promised he would stop them last year. He is making the problems are getting worse, and that is because they are failing to go after the criminal gangs who are organising these dangerous boats.
Thank you, Yvette Cooper. Jay's in Bedfordshire. Your question to the two. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, as a concerned citizen for the future of my children, why would you like to leave European Court of Human Rights?
Well, I don't know that Labour actually has that policy, but certainly Rishi Sunak has been very strident on this. If required, he would consider it. Would you support that? James Cleverly, I'm coming to you first, obviously, on this.
So that is not the policy that we have taken.
No, the Prime Minister has said he would consider it.
Our view is that the Safety of Rwanda bill is legally tight and does and ensures that we can deliver the Rwanda scheme in complete accordance with our international obligations.
You saw him on the TV debate answering the question. He would be prepared if needed.
Now, what we've said, and we have been consistent in our use of language, that if there is a contradiction between a legal judgment or an international court and our ability to defend our borders, we would always defend our borders. Many countries are in dispute with the ECHR. France is, I think Switzerland is. So being in dispute with a court...
would you ever see the day we would leave the court?
We do not envisage there'll be any necessity to do that.
Why is he saying he'd be prepared to do it?
That's not what he said. What he said is that if there is a contradiction...
On the TV debate, he said if necessary, he would be prepared to do that, with the caveat, if necessary. We all heard that, Home Secretary.
The Safety of Rwanda bill means that we can deploy our deterrent within our international obligations, and if there was a contradiction between a court's decision and defending our borders, we will always prioritise defending our borders.
Yvette Cooper.
We should abide by international law because we want other countries.
Right.
We want other countries to abide by international law as well. We shouldn't be aligning ourselves with Russia and Belarus by saying we're not going to be part of the ECHR. We should be actually saying we want to work with other countries, and other countries won't work with us if we're not showing that we're abiding by international law. It's those international partnerships. It's probably one of the things that James and I might agree on is that international partnerships are important for dealing with these. You won't get them if you pull out of the ECHR. It wasn't me that made it a straw man. It wasn't me that made it. It was Rishi Sunak who has made this the issue. He's the one who said he wants to do that.
He's prepared to do what it takes. When asked about the ECHR, we've just quickly looked it up. Back to you, Mr. Cleverly. How else do you interpret that when asked if he would leave the ECHR? I don't know how else to interpret that.
It's what he wants to do. He wants to send that signal.
Let's hear from Mr. Cleverly.
We have been absolutely clear that our actions are within the framework of international law. We are a law-abiding, indeed a law-drafting country. We created the European Convention on Human Rights. That was one of Churchill's actions at the end of the Second World War. But we have said that it is wrong that international courts prevent nation-state governments doing the right thing when it comes to controlling their own borders. And the interesting thing, when it comes to kind of interventionist judges and lawyers, Keir Starmer campaigned as a barrister to prevent foreign criminals being deported. The fact is, we will always do the right thing by this country, and the Labour Party has
Is it a red line for you to leave the ECHR?
Has a track record of being weak on border
Mr. Cleverly, would it be a red line for you to leave the ECHR?
There is no requirements to do so because we have put
I remind you of his language.
Yes, and the language is that we are completely confident that the Safety of Rwanda Bill fits within international obligations and enables us to bring in a deterrent which the Labour Party would take off the table.
Adam, you're the next caller. Coming to your moment. Yvette Cooper, you speak a lot about seeking cooperation with France and other European countries. I'm sure James Cleverly and his colleagues have sought to do it. Why will the cooperation suddenly magically take place under a Labour administration, do you imagine?
We think we can do better security agreements with other European countries, and we believe that on the basis of conversations we've already had with Europol and others. I think actually under a successive Conservative, particularly former Home Secretaries, they have been resistant to having those serious discussions about the kind of information sharing, the criminal intelligence that we need to work together on. James actually, may well agree with me on this one. His problem is that Rishi Sunak doesn't.
All right, let's go to another call.
Oh, hang on, Nick. She always gets the last word.
OK, go ahead.
She always gets the last word.
Sorry, go ahead if you
She's
feel
talking
that.
about international. I've signed an agreement with Frontex. I have met the interior ministers of the Channel Group, which are the European countries with channel-facing European countries. We have the Sandhurst Agreement of international cooperation with France. We have the Paris Agreement that Rishi Sunak signed with President Macron. The idea that there's this magical European cooperation that makes this problem go away is nonsense because, as I say, Europe is faced with a greater challenge per capita than the UK is, and it is farcical. It is a con on the British people that the Labour Party say that somehow they can magic up this agreement to make the problem go away.
Let's get to Adam in Luton. Adam, your question. Go ahead, Adam.
Hi. When was the threshold met for economic migrants, say from Sierra Leone, that were once okay, but now we're totally full up? Stop the boats. Don't let them in. We're full. When did it cross over from being okay to not being okay?
Well, possibly you might look at. I mean, if you look at earlier times, I think. Net migration was in the terms of tens of thousands. Here we go, mid-90s. Now you're looking more at 700,000. Possibly that's what gives cause for concern. Shall we start with you on that, Mr. Cleverly? I think this call is a little bit concerned about treating humans as numbers. Is it the right practice, still the right policy? Because others would say, yes, the impact you have on the NHS and on schools and on roads and everything else, you have to look at it like that.
Well, look, the reason that we have a census every decade is because you have to have an idea about the number of people who are going to be in your country, who will need school places, housing, etc., etc., etc. So people are people, and we will always treat them as people, as individuals, but also the number of people is important. With regard to my mother, she came here legally. She filled out the forms. She did the right thing. She did not arrive illegal. She she certainly didn't put herself in the hands of criminal gangs. And we've always been a generous, welcoming country to people who play by the rules and do it properly, and we will always be that. But we've also got to make sure that we do have control over our borders, something that the Labour Party would throw away.
OK, let's come to it. Are you uncomfortable sometimes talking about people in terms of numbers, or is it a necessity to look after services such as Mr Cleverly says?
So I think one of the points that I made earlier when we first started talking about it is that immigration has always been an important part of our country. People have always come here to work in our public services, do incredible jobs, and also start up some of our biggest businesses in this country as well. So of course that continues to be important, but the system has to be controlled and managed. And at the moment we've seen the trebling of net migration reflects this big increase in overseas recruitment, which in itself reflects a failure to do proper training and skills, a failure to actually manage the workforce plans here in the UK. And we just think that overseas recruitment shouldn't be an alternative to training and to boosting recruitment here in the UK. That's why we need the controls and management in place.
We've got you for about 2 minutes. I'm going to rattle through some questions on emails that are on other matters because, as I say again, in what, about 9-10 days, one of you is going to be the Home Secretary. So let's talk a little bit about crime. This comes in from Peter in Leicestershire. I'm going to come to you, Yvette Cooper, first. Sir Keir Starmer has promised, Nick says on the radio today, Sir Keir Starmer has promised to halve knife crime within 5 years. How will he be able to achieve that when the issue is so bad in London under a Labour mayor? This is the story I'm sure you've heard. Yvette Cooper, you're nodding. So how are you going to achieve that? If I do point you towards London, 29% of knife crime.
It's a mission to halve knife crime over a decade. In fact, if you look back over the last 8 years, we've seen an 80% increase in knife crime. And actually the biggest increases have been outside London, including some of the biggest increases have been in small towns and suburbs. This is a nationwide problem. We have to make sure we can tackle the online knife sales, which are dangerous. We need to make sure there are consequences for carrying knives, have a proper Young Futures programme to prevent young people getting drawn into crime, and also get the neighbourhood police back on the streets. We want to see this as a mission, and I hope this would be a cross-party mission as well, because it is devastating.
Well, let's bring Mr Cleverly in. Crimes involving knives or sharp instrument in England and Wales up 7% from 2022 for last year. This is a battle you're losing?
So your caller or the person that emailed in was absolutely right. London under Labour distorts the figures. The figures have gone through the roof in London, and that distorts the national figures. When Yvette talks about knife crime going up, one of the reasons, and that is it is counterintuitive. One of the reasons those figures are going up is because across most of the country, stop and search has increased. When you stop and search, you find knives. Those are reported as crimes. The actual number of people hurt with a bladed weapon has, for the most part, come down. It is distorted by London, where it has gone up, because a Labour leader, a political leader, has discouraged stop and search, has failed to recruit the number of police officers, and this is another example of where Labour words and Labour actions are completely contradictory.
So I've talked to parents across the country who are devastated by knife crime, and I really think this could be something we should have cross-party agreement on. It should be a moral mission for all of us.
Briefly, Mr Cleverly, and I've got one more question.
In Labour-run London, the actions that you need, so failure to recruit officers, failure to retain officers, failure to support stop and search has seen...
I just think this is an insult to families across the country who are also seeing rising knife crime.
I know both of you are committed to stopping. I know both of you
always trying to get the last dig in. The point is, actions speak louder than words. This is not a criticism of the families involved. It is a criticism of the political leadership
I want to get this London. Richard in Cornwall, I'm very concerned that the government has not been tough enough on organisations such as Just Stop Oil. What would a new government do? I will do you second, Miss Cleverly, if I may. Would Labour be tougher on legislation for Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion?
The Just Stop Oil is just pathetic. It was just awful what we saw at Stonehenge, a total disgrace, and nobody should be doing that kind of thing. Well, the police have powers to take enforcement action, and we will back them all the way against these groups. I think it's just, they are idiots who are really potentially damaging our national heritage, and they shouldn't be getting away with it.
Mr Cleverly, we need to be tougher with these people.
So we have been tougher. We have brought in specific legislation, and we will continue to do so to make sure that these people who damage property, damage our heritage, damage artwork, and disadvantage and inconvenience hard-working people. We've already brought in measures. We will continue to do so, because what they are doing is not only counterproductive, it's dangerous, it's stupid, it's vandalism, pure and simple.
My final question goes only to the Home Secretary. The Daily Telegraph is reporting that Scotland Yard has leaked the names in the Conservative betting scandal. That's denied by Scotland Yard. Home Secretary, do you have a comment on this?
So I can't really discuss this. I don't know the details. I don't know why that accusation has been put forward towards
Well, a source close to the Cabinet
police.
Office has told the Daily Telegraph, is what's reported.
Well, as I say, I don't know any details of that, and I don't know where any information around that might come from. The Gambling Commission have said that it is inappropriate for us to discuss it. We, of course,
they're not a
will
legal
have
body, are they?
Well, but look, you respect the instructions of the institutions that you put in place, and we
If
do
the Met
respect
was
our
responsible,
institutions.
which they deny, how would you respond?
Well, look, again, professional standards is something that I've worked on since the first day I was in political office. I am not going to speculate on this. It will be unfair for everyone involved for me to speculate.
I should offer you a word if you want to.
I think it's in the public interest for people to know in the run-up to an election whether people involved in the election have also been betting on it and have been potentially being investigated. That's why we think there should be transparency. This does have the real feel of Partygate to it. It's just, one rule for them, another for everybody else. It needs to be investigated, but there has to be some transparency.
Keir Starmer was investigated for having beers in a party during COVID, wasn't he?
Well, I don't know you'd want to go back on Partygate, would you?
No, but
probably best to...
seeing as you brought it up, he was
seriously,
he was investigated as well, wasn't
double
he?
standards.
No, he was
for
investigated,
James. I think it's really damaging, and it really undermines public trust.
My thanks to you both, if we can draw a line there. James Cleverly, thank you. You're
Thank
the Home
you,
Secretary.
Nick.
Yvette Cooper, Shadow Home Secretary, appearing here on LBC.